towns. Where were you born, and where'd you grow up?
Well, Larry, I was born in Fort Worth in 1944, March 1944, and I lived there till I was about 10, and I moved out to Midland, Texas for about a year and a half, and then we moved to Billings, Montana for about 3.5 years, and then to Colorado, and then to a little place out of Chicago called Barrington, at which point I went away to a private high school for 2 years, and by the time I got out of high school, my parents had moved back to Houston. And I went to the University of Colorado from high school. So mostly Texas. I would say forever a Texan, you know. And secondly, Colorado. I spent a lot of time in.
Did you?
And I hope to see again someday.
Did you start writing as a young boy, write poetry and things like that? Or?
Oh, well, in high school, I did. We had a serious old English teacher who made us memorize Shakespeare. You know, and being a private school, it was like 8 or 10 boys in a class, you know, that kind of education. Half of the guys were there because they couldn't be handled anywhere else, and half of the guys were there because of athletic ability, and, you know, some were there because of scholastic ability. And I kind of felt in between, pretty much.
So as a result of that education, you were steeped in the classics, all the great poets and Shakespeare and all that.
I think a lot more so than public schools do. And I can remember I wrote a play when I was a senior, and I wrote some sonnets. You know, just the rhyme scheme is so weird. I just want to see if I could do it and make any sense out of it. Which I have these days. I have a couple of songs like that I came upon a strange rhyme scheme, and just almost academically wanted to see if I could follow it through without throwing away any lines, you know, and still have it make sense.
Had you picked up a guitar by high school? Were you putting your poems to music?
I started, I guess, shortly after the Christmas, after I saw Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show, which I would have been 9 years old, I guess. And I saw that show with my older sister and her 2 girlfriends, because we had one of the few TVs in the neighborhood back then. And I saw the effect that Elvis had on these girls. And by that time I was starting to realize girls were somehow different than boys. And I watched Elvis drill these young ladies, and I just figured, wow, he's got all the money in the world, and he can have any car that he wants, and these girls love him, so there must be something to the guitar. So I asked my father if I could have one for Christmas. He said, well, if I promised to learn Fraulein, the first song. And I promised him I would, and I did, and I got one for Christmas, and still sing Fraulein.
Do you recall the first time you played something that you wrote yourself for an audience that wasn't your family?
Well, pretty much. It was at the Jester Lounge in Houston, Texas, out Westheimer. And it was kind of the tail end of the folk boom, kind of the very tail end. But it was still going on enough to where the Jester would have 5 or 6 people play on any given night, you know, 3 or 4 songs each. And it would be full almost every night. You know, and the cover charge was $2 or whatever. K.T. Osland played there. Guy Clark played there. And
mid-'60s, right?
And about 65, I guess, 64 or 5. And I played there, and I ended up, there were these folks that had come up from the serious traditional folk ranks, kind of. Like Guy Clark was singing Cotton Mill Girls and, you know, whaling ballads and traditional folk stuff. And Frank Davis, famous Houston character, was singing real traditional stuff and some lead belly. And they all played it and sang it better than I could, so I figured I needed just some different stuff. And I started writing. The first about 15 or 20 songs were kind of geared for the beer crowd. You know, kind of some of them off color, and a lot of talking blues and this, that, and the other. I mean, seriously geared for the beer crowd. I became the house opening act at the Jester, and they would bring people through, so I got to see all these people. I got to see Alan Dameron in his prime, and he really impressed me. He put, it still does, I'm sure, a serious show, you know, entertainer-wise. I would just be awestricken that Alan would change shirts between sets. That was all right. And I got to see Doc Watson, and I got to meet Lightning Hopkins, and this whole time, and Jerry Jeff Walker, and opening for these guys. I just kind of began to realize that if I was going to the University of Houston at that time, and I was seriously being torn between staying in school and pre-law and playing the guitar. And the guitar like slowly won out. It was a case of law school losing out as much as the guitar winning out.
Now, Bob Dylan had been around for 4 or 5 years and releasing records. Had he been any influence on your writing at all?
Well, he was a big influence in that. Jerry Jeff was a big influence because of all those people that I played with and opened for, Jerry Jeff was kind of the first one that really wrote his own stuff. Back when Little Bird, you know, his own songs, Ramblin', Gamblin', stuff like that. And I realized that that's what I'd been doing. I'd just been doing kind of a lighter version of it all. And then I think I clicked in. I started writing trying to write more serious stuff then, which turned out was not hard. It kind of was where I should have been, or it's where I evolved to. And I remember distinctly the first serious material I ever wrote was Waiting Around to Die, which is pretty serious.